Hi everyone, once again my name is Keith Whalen and you are attending a webinar on the top 10 things to look for when considering a managed service offering. Today presenting we have Mr. Ken Foley, Mr. Richard Stout, and with that I give you Ken and Stout.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, so Richard and I got together and wanted to put together a webinar on managed services and things you should be looking for if you're considering an offering.
And I said, but we don't do straight up sales advertisement webinars here. It has to be informative. So the premise of today's webinar is, how should you shop for managed services? What are some things that you should ask a potential managed services provider for, how does this work under your managed services offering? What are our comparison points when shopping for managed service providers? So hopefully this will give you some ideas to help evaluate the different offerings that are out there. If you're an existing managed services client, if you're one of our managed service clients, these are some things that you can hold your provider accountable to, and ask them how they're see how are you doing in these areas, and ask them how can we improve the services in these areas.
Absolutely. Get control.
All right. So we are RPI closing in on a 20th anniversary of providing implementation and support services to the Lawson community. We've been working with Lawson for a really long time. We've been working with Infor Cloud Suite since its inception. We support both sides of that solution equally at this point. We have a really strong managed services offering that we've had out there for maybe 5 years or so. It continues to evolve, it continues to get better, and we're super excited to have Ken at the helm right now. He's doing some really exciting stuff for our offering.
Really appreciate that, yeah. All right, so we'll start off here. So we'll define managed services. So basically, a customer will outsource management and functional responsibilities for IT services in order to improve the operations and improve on uptime of a service, the productivity of a service, and try to lower operational costs while doing so. And that way, they can leverage their internal resources on more strategic initiatives for their business. It's opposite to what we call break fix. Break fix is more a reactive program.
You break it, I fix it?
You break it, I fix it. The service provider will bill you for the work that's done, usually on a time and material basis. And it could fluctuate depending on issues that come up. And they're really not incented to minimize the incidents. Whereas in a managed services, it's more of a fixed fee approach. It's proactive. Your provider is maintaining your environment, making sure that we're minimizing the number of incidents. So we're more incented to do it that way. And that's usually with a service level agreement.
Yeah.
So Richard and I, over the years of experience working with clients, a number of things come up about their needs for a managed services program. One, obviously, we talked about already, is improved service availability. So that's reducing the overall time to resolution on incidents, but also and minimizing frequency, of course, but also to avoid outages, from the get-go, so that you don't have any unscheduled downtime, or try to minimize that as much as possible. And the other item here is free up the staff to focus on either other applications to support or strategic initiatives. So it's a way to supplement your staff with folks that really understand the Lawson or Infor technologies, which becomes more cost effective because pretty much it's going to be done in a more efficient manner, resolving issues. And then clients have said that they need subject matter expertise. You don't need it all the time, but things come up and they need some advice on optimizing a process or whatever. Since they have a relationship with the managed service provider, that provider should be able to provide that type of support.
Yeah, totally. No one person can be an expert across the full breadth of the Infor solution. It takes a team to fill in all the niche expertise that you really need to take advantage of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then questions we get all the time is this whole compatibility of all the components that make up the Infor ecosystem. And if I update this to this, how does that affect, what's the downstream impacts to the rest of my architecture? So being able to solve that puzzle for them is another reason why they'll come to a managed service provider who understands the technology. And then minimizing the cost and effort of maintaining the staffing levels. So, I've had clients that are in remote locations and have an awful hard time keeping, Infor or Lawson administrative resources.
Yeah.
So we get calls all the time. Hey, so-and-so has left. I need someone to fill in. And then the answer could be, well, do you necessarily need someone to fill in, or we could actually provide that service for you, and you can focus on other things.
So to sum up the whole, so why managed services? It's about increasing the reliability and uptime of your application. It's about being able to make more strategic use of your staff, right? Because who better than your own staff who understands your business and your business users to do more project-oriented work or enhancement work rather than just scrambling to keep the lights on. It's about tapping into subject matter expertise, both application expertise as well as technical expertise, right? I mean, there's so many different parts of the Lawson environment today. So simply understanding and how all those work together, keeping on top of what are the required updates each year, cyclical updates, new releases from Infor, the N-2 policy, all that stuff, sort of solving that puzzle. And then normalizing your own resource costs and being able to not get caught in a bind when only one or two resources on your end are out at the same time.
I'm exhausted.
Right? Okay, so those are all pretty good reasons, pretty good drivers to maybe consider a managed service offering. So let's dive into the top 10 things top 10 categories you could say that you want to evaluate a managed service offering on.
So to start off with an initial assessment. So a provider is not going to be able to go in cold and be able to support your environment. It takes a lot of preparation. Learning about your environment, learning about you, learning about your business and your needs and so forth. So we have a number of categories under the assessment. So we have a technical assessment where we go in, review your architecture, look at the product versioning, look at configuration and so forth. How do you back up your environment? Do you have DR in place? Your security, how does the security look? Do you do a security audit, review? Do people have access to only the things they should have access to? And then the next category is documentation. So as a managed services provider, it's so helpful when you go in and a client has all the documentation on everything that they have. So it really makes discovery that much easier. So a provider should be asking for that information, but as a customer or a client, if you have that prepared, it's going to make that journey a lot quicker and cheaper in essence. So, and then performance-wise, should be looking at how things are configured, WebSphere, the grid, how are things performing, talking with users, find out from them, are they experiencing any issues with performance? And that way you can get a sense of, okay, where are we starting from, taking over a program like that. Because again, we're trying to minimize issues. Right. So you want to know where you're starting off with and hopefully cutting down on issues from the get-go, low-hanging fruit in essence. And then, service desk and incidents. One thing I love to do is if you guys have, history on service desk tickets and so forth related to your Infor loss and environment, if you could share that with us, we'd be able to go in, review, and maybe identify some repeating issues in the system, and we can probably identify things fairly quickly that we could actually minimize incidents, from the get-go.
Right.
So, all right, my favorite, monitoring.
Yeah, exactly. This is the big one. This is a big advantage of having managed services, is having a system and solution in place to keep an eye on all the various components of your loss environment.
Yep, so basically you have different levels of monitoring. So obviously the infrastructure itself, so if we're talking about an on-premise environment, you want to make sure that you're watching all your servers, are they up and down, services, you name it. You want to look at resource utilization, so disk, CPU, memory are the heavy hitters. And then backups, are the backups actually happening? Are there any errors in the backups? Because you want to be able to recover if needed. So you got to watch that. Things to remember with monitoring. Basically, the provider should provide you. I knew I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say that at some point. Provide. An MSP provides a monitoring blueprint. So basically, based on the structure of your environment, what you have, what products you own, and so forth, they should be able to come up with a best practice monitoring blueprint or solution that you can leverage for your environment. And if you already have a enterprise monitoring solution, you should use that. Why use a third-party monitoring solution when you already have your own in-house? So that provider should be able to work with your monitoring or system admin, whoever's responsible for configuring the monitoring, to go in, work with you, and put that together and get things implemented the right way. And the end user is one thing we've learned. The end user is always going to notify you of an outage during business hours. I don't know how many times a customer will come to me and say, how come the monitoring did not alert me before this person called a minute after the issue happened?
Right.
Because they're the best monitor. They're on the system immediately. And usually with monitoring, you have polling, so maybe every 5 minutes it's checking on things. Well, they're checking every second as they're on the system. However, the value comes in at night when no one's on the system and you have an outage. So I recently had a situation where there was an outage, 10 p.m. No one's on the system, so no one knows, right? You get the call the first thing in the morning. So having that monitoring in place, you're going to know at 10 p.m. or 10:05 p.m. that there's the issue. It gets addressed then. So during business hours, you don't have the outage because it's addressed already at night. So
I just want to point out before you move on, the infrastructure when we first started getting into system monitoring, we found that there are a lot of solutions for the infrastructure monitoring, and in fact, I think most of our managed services clients, they do have enterprise monitor in place for all their servers, like their infrastructure team runs that. So basic operating system characteristics, that's already covered. The challenge is having monitoring that's loss and aware.
Correct.
And I think that's what you really want to ask for, and that's what we see here in this sort of application monitoring section. That's where you want to rely on your Lawson or Infor expert to be able to provide either an actual piece of software that does it, or the guidance to your infrastructure team so they could build out the tests to know, because seeing that the portal web server is up, that doesn't necessarily give you confidence that you're not going to see the user attempt to log in and get a profile servlet error or something like that.
Right.
That's really application specific. That just a general "is it up" check isn't
Right.
really gonna tell you.
Exactly. Yeah. So to that case, you would have an application transaction monitor where it would go out and get the response. So one, it will check, is it a valid response? So your case, if it's a servlet error, it's not going to be a valid response. So service is not available. And then in turn, if it is a valid response, how quickly is it coming back? So it's that user experience that you're looking at.
Yeah.
The other thing too is capturing events. You don't want to you want to capture pretty much all of the errors that you're going to hit. However, you only want to get alerted on the ones that are actionable, stuff that you have to work on immediately, because you have the boy cried wolf syndrome. If everything's coming back at you, you're going to get tired of looking at all these alerts, and you're going to miss the critical ones. So, and then proactive administrative maintenance. So basically, with the proactive administration, such as like checking for those monitoring alerts, those alerts that are not, critical, but could be an issue down the road, that leads to proactive maintenance. So when you look at your alerts and you find these errors or whatever, system's up and running and all that. However, that alert may be addressed by a patch or whatever. So that would lead you to a proactive maintenance program. And then, reviewing the Infor critical notifications compatibility matrix online, we can identify, or a provider could identify, critical patches that would apply to your environment. So then, again, that feeds the proactive maintenance program. Things to remember, the MSP should provide a documented maintenance program, schedule maintenance activities that are going to be performed. It's part of your agreement. If you're on a Windows platform, you get the security patches from Microsoft, second Tuesday every month. Make sure that's part of your program, because you're going to want to apply those to your test environment. Let that chill for about a week, make sure it's not breaking anything, and then eventually put it on your production environment and schedule that maintenance window, in essence. Incident, problem, and change management. So again, that initial assessment, identify the low-hanging fruit, try to get those out of the way almost immediately. This should be included in your fixed monthly fee. So again, it's not a break-fix deal. Should come with a response SLA. And with that SLA, though, the provider is usually going to require that you submit the issue using a mutually agreed upon process. So if it's a ticketing system or whatever, because in order to report on response time, they need a way to capture that information.
Right.
So, and then many of the same types of incidents, if you get many of them, you'll notice you got a problem, right? So if you have multiple incidents that are the same and they have the same root cause, you have an issue. So you treat that a little bit differently. And again, the MSP should follow your change management policies and procedures. So, it's your system, your environment on premise. They should follow the letter of the law for your change management process. And then service requests. So a service request is not an incident, right? It has nothing to do with an outage or a degradation of a service. It has to do with ad hoc requests or even standard requests like account provisioning or something like that. It has nothing to do with an outage. So it's not considered an incident. And so that would obviously have a different SLA usually. And then, so the MSP should block hours for that in the contract, because again, it's not going to be part of your base program with incident management, but it would be a budgeted number of hours you could use. You could do a time and material if you wish. We could, you could spread it across the term of the contract and divide it up evenly if you wanted to do that and just budget for it that way. So there's different approaches you can do there, so you can ask them. And then service request hours should be reported on a agreed cadence. So we would do it like on a monthly basis, have like a status report. This is the number of hours you used, so that you can manage your budget accordingly. And then service level agreements. So in service level agreements, you're defining response times. Usually you have business hours defined, after hours defined. So after hours is going to be either during after hours during weekdays, weekends, and holidays. Make sure you understand whose holidays they're referring to. Is it the MSP's holidays, or is it your holidays? And it's always good to have that conversation up front. And then in terms of business hours, make sure those are clearly defined in after hours, so you know. And then in terms of priority levels, so priority levels are based on impact and urgency of a ticket. So you want to know what constitutes, what's considered critical, what's high, medium, upfront, so that when users are submitting tickets, they understand what the priority really is, and you can set expectations in terms of response. Mm-hmm. And that could be different for business hours versus after hours.
Yeah.
So that would all be defined in the agreement.
This is probably one of the harder ones to do an apples for apples comparison.
Correct.
Across different vendors, but generally I think all the vendors are flexible to tailor this. And it's a big impact on cost too. So depending on what level of SLAs you need, that'll have a big price factor to it.
And then after hours support. So the MSP should clearly define business hours and after hours, as we discussed. The process for submitting the tickets after hours should be, clearly defined too, so that obviously you get the correct response. You should ask the provider also for an on-call schedule. So once you get set up and all that, knowing who's actually on call does help, and they should be flexible enough to provide that to you if there's a situation where you're not able to get a hold of somebody and it's a dire situation. And then they should work with you on after-hours maintenance windows for production maintenance, so up front. So it could be scheduled on on a monthly basis if you want, or if you have kind of an emergency maintenance situation. It could be done ahead of, more quickly, more immediate. So. And then dedicated resources. So for a managed services model, it's usually going to be a fractional FTE. That's why it's cost effective, right? So you're not buying people. So it's not a full-time resource.
Plus, you're getting the skills and expertise of like a dozen people.
Correct.
Without committing to having a dozen full-time employees.
Absolutely. However, you should have somebody who's dedicated to managing your program.
Yeah.
So that could be, what we would call an engagement manager. Others call it program managers or whatever. But they're the person you go to as the initial escalation if anything comes up. And then they're the ones that will be working with you, depending on your cadence, reporting on status, tickets, how's the maintenance program going, what are we finding, stuff like that. And it would also be good to have somebody who is primary from a technical side. Having somebody who's technical that really understands your environment, very familiar with your environment, is key. And they can help out the rest of the pool of talent behind the scenes and get them up to speed on things. I think
this is a big differentiator. And anybody that you're considering for managed services, you want to make sure that they're going to have a team that's consistent, a team that you get to know and they get to know you, and is able to jump in pretty quickly. And then, there's logistical concerns too, because most clients, they don't necessarily want to provision like a generic remote access. So they oftentimes want named accounts, so that lines up well with named resources on the team.
Now, if the provider has consulting resources, subject matter experts, whether technical or functional, having access to them as part of the program, I think, is also a key thing to have. Because, your frontline may not know every nuance to a product, and having the ability to escalate that ticket to somebody within the same organization who understands your SLA and your business can certainly help there. So it provides a lot of value. And then governance model. So in essence, they should provide you with an escalation path. Who in the organization is responsible at each level of escalation and so forth? What's the deliverables at each level? So for an example, in quarterly engagement review or business review, like a QBR as they call them, that's like every 3 months, you sit down with leadership, review the program, what's the health of the program, how are we doing, what changes should, getting feedback about the program, so that way we can make adjustments on the fly. A provider should be able to make adjustments on the fly.
Yeah.
So anyway, they should have some sort of governance model, something like this. Not, doesn't have to be exactly like this, but it clearly shows you, who's involved at each level of the issues, so that that you have an executive or somebody at a high level that has eyes on this, so that they're following through.
Yeah.
With
the
agreement.
idea here is that all these are contracts that go over a certain term. Oftentimes it's an annual contract, and you want to make sure that your service is awesome throughout the entire contract duration. You want to make sure that if things aren't working, if there's a little friction, if there's missed expectations, you have an avenue for those to be addressed. And if there are just general changes in how the provider needs to engage to make it a successful relationship, you have a way to alter course throughout the contract and not get stuck in a place where you're stuck with a provider that just isn't 100% working.
Right. Yeah. All right, number 10, although we have some Easter eggs in here. Metrics, KPIs, and reporting. So basically, if you're meeting on a monthly basis to review status and so forth, you're going to want to report along with that, so you have something to review. Other providers may have a dashboard online available to you, which I think is great, because then you can go on anytime and look to see what's the status of my tickets, how things are going, and so forth. Ticket aging, priority, just different metrics, KPIs you could be looking at as part of the health of the program, and those could be reviewed during that quarterly business review. Root cause analysis reporting, I think, is critical.
Yeah.
So if you have an outage, why? We like to do the 5 whys. Well, this happened. Well, why? Well, because of this. Well, why? Why did that happen? And then eventually, when you get down to the 5th one, you have the root cause. So that's something we like to do here. So, getting a report on the root cause, what's the next steps? Maintenance, does that have to occur? Does a patch have to get applied? Whatever. What are the next steps to get to the actual resolution? So, and then of course the quarterly business review. So that could be more of a deck format, with reporting and so forth, with all the KPIs. And then we got a few extras.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bill.
You need to have an onboarding plan, right?
Absolutely.
You need to know that the provider has a process for bringing on a new client and getting up to speed.
Right. That's basic. We'll move on, because we have a few extra here.
Yeah.
Service delivery model. So kind of like that onboarding planning, that's kind of this transition planning. So it would be great if the provider had, okay, here's your phases transitioning into their team taking over your services. So what are the activities that happen in each phase, and what are the deliverables? So that way you have a roadmap. Okay, you know, I don't know how long it's going to take me, but these are the things that have to happen in order to get to steady state where the provider is taken over and is managing your environment as you would have.
Yeah.
All right, and then optimization is where we want to get to, where we're actually improving upon the services that you had originally, because that's what you're paying for. So, and then flexibility.
Yes, finally, you want to. So, you know, all clients are unique, and just, you know, a one-size-fits-all managed service offering really isn't a good fit for anybody, right? So I think, you know, generally I think all the loss and managed service providers have some different levels, different options. I know we really pride ourselves on tailoring an offering for what a client really needs. So they're purchasing the services that make an impact, and they don't have to pay for services that they don't necessarily need.
Right.
So I mean, you know, there's a lot of different factors here in terms of, you know, how quickly do you need people to respond? What's the breadth of your system? What modules do you have deployed? How many users are in the system? There are a lot of different factors that sort of go into it.
Right.
And we want to find that, you know, we want to find that right balance.
Right.
Between, you know, a value-based
Exactly what I was going to say. The client needs value from the program that you put in front of them.